We carry these memories not as burdens, but as stories that deserve to be heard.
The desert sun rose with a muted gold that never quite felt warm. It burned without comfort, searing the horizon in the same way the months had burned through Sergeant Andrew's soul. 12 long months, the kind that reshape a man from the inside out. In the beginning, he'd counted the days. Now he measured time by missions, by losses, by the distant voice of his daughter replaying his head before sleep. The small village he patrolled that morning lay draped in a silence that wasn't peace. The houses were thin shells of stone, pockmarked with bullet scars. Dust drifted like tired ghosts across the road. Somewhere behind a cracked wall, a child laughed. That sound, fragile and alive, reminded him too much of home. He slowed his steps, tightening the strap of his rifle, glancing at the horizon as if the sky itself carried Sarah's voice. He'd been deployed when Emily was barely 2. Now she was 3.5, old enough to know he existed only through photographs taped to her mother's mirror. He used to send voice notes when the connection was good, snippets of bedtime songs or stories about stars, trying to thread his presence through a digital void. But there were no stars here, only the buzz of heat and the low hum of engines that marked the edge of danger. At night, when his men dozed or cleaned their rifles in silence, Andrew would take out the photo, Sarah in a floral dress, holding baby Emily on a spring afternoon. The sun had caught their hair in a halo of gold. He could almost smell the grass. He'd fold the photo back carefully and tuck it in the small inner pocket of his vest, close to his heart. That pocket had become his anchor, one small square of paper between the living and the lost. He had become the kind of leader who carried both fear and calm in equal measure. The younger soldiers looked to him because his voice never shook, even when the air around them did. He gave orders with precision, but his mind often drifted elsewhere, to Sarah laughing over burnt pancakes, to Emily's soft hand gripping his thumb. War demanded that he suppress all that, but the heart doesn't understand orders. The ambush came on a morning that felt no different from any other. They had been clearing a stretch of road rumored to be seeded with IEDs. The air was heavy with a metallic tang of anticipation. Andrew walked point, his boots crunching over gravel, eyes scanning the ground for anything out of place. A wire, a patch too freshly covered. The explosion wasn't near him at first. It came from the second Humvee, a deep concussion that ripped the world open. The blast threw dust and metal skyward. Andrew shouted for his men to take cover. But then came the gunfire, short, precise bursts from a ridge. He hit the ground, returning fire, heart hammering not from fear, but from instinct. Time fractured into flashes, muzzle flares, screaming, the sight of one of his men crawling through smoke. He didn't notice his own wound until he tried to stand. His leg buckled. Pain bloomed hot and quick. Still, he dragged himself toward the nearest soldier, pulling him behind a broken wall. Blood soaked his uniform. The world shrank to the rhythm of gunfire and the hiss of his own breath. Then came a strange calm. He felt the heat of the desert fade, replaced by an inner cold. In that moment, his mind betrayed him with mercy. It brought Sarah's face, then Emily's giggle, then the echo of his home. He whispered a name he couldn't finish before darkness swallowed the rest. Back home. Sarah woke to the sound of the doorbell. Morning light filtered through half-drawn curtains. She wasn't expecting anyone, and even before she reached the door, she knew. The sight of 2 officers in pressed uniforms dissolved her knees. They didn't have to say the words. She read them in the silence between their breaths. Missing in action. For days, she couldn't speak the phrase aloud. It hung in the house like smoke, seeping into everything. The hallway photos, Emily's drawings on the fridge, the scent of coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. She went through the motions of living because Emily still needed cereal, baths, bedtime stories. Her daughter would ask, "When's Daddy coming home?" And Sarah would answer with a smile so practiced it almost hurt. "Soon, baby. He's just working very far away." At night, when Emily was asleep, Sarah would sit by the window with her phone in her lap, scrolling through old messages. Andrew's voice still lingered in her voicemail, laughing about sandstorms, promising, "I'll be home before the garden blooms." The garden was dead now, overrun with weeds she couldn't bring herself to pull. Weeks became months. Hope turned into something quieter, less bright, but more enduring. She began to write letters, even though she didn't know if he'd ever read them. Every week, she filled pages with stories of Emily learning new words, of the way the sunset painted the house gold. She mailed them to his unit, knowing they might never find him, but the act itself kept her tethered. Andrew survived the blast, though barely. The next thing he remembered was the endless drone of a helicopter, then the sterile chill of a field hospital. His leg was bandaged, his shoulder immobilized, and his thoughts scattered like sand. He asked for his unit. 3 had made it. 2 had not. The guilt settled deeper than any wound. The medic said he was lucky, but luck didn't feel like this. For weeks, he drifted between surgeries in silence, his mind replaying moments he wished he could erase. He didn't dream. He relived. When they finally declared him stable enough for transport, he felt like a ghost being carried back to the living. The flight home was long, stitched together by the hum of engines and the ache of waiting. Through the window, the clouds looked like an ocean he'd forgotten how to swim in. The reunion was not the cinematic scene he'd imagined in his weakest hours. There were no parades, no triumphant music, just a sterile echo of an airport hangar, the muted shuffle of families waiting behind a rope. Then he saw her, Sarah, smaller than he remembered, hair tucked back, eyes wide and trembling. Emily stood beside her, holding a stuffed bear, uncertain but smiling. When Sarah ran to him, the world snapped back into color. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed, the kind of sound that carries both relief and grief in one breath. Emily clung to his leg, whispering, "Daddy," as if testing whether the words still belonged to her. He knelt, ignoring the pain, and pulled them close. He was home, but the word home had changed. The weeks that followed were quiet, but heavy. Their house felt both familiar and strange, every corner holding echoes of the life he'd missed. Emily was taller, speaking in full sentences now. Sarah moved through the rooms like someone relearning a rhythm. At night, Andrew awake drenched in sweat, gasping for air. The sound of a car backfiring outside made his heart race. He'd stare at the ceiling, tracing the pattern of shadows until Sarah's hand found his. "You're safe?" she'd whisper. But safety was an idea, not a feeling. He tried to keep busy, fixing the porch steps, reading Emily's stories, mowing the lawn. But sometimes the smell of gasoline or the thud of distant fireworks pulled him back to that road, that explosion. He'd freeze, lost in memory, until Emily's laughter cut through like light, breaking through clouds. Sarah carried her own kind of quiet sorrow. She had held the house together alone, braved the fear of loss, learned to be both parent at once. Now she had him back, but not entirely. She could see it in his eyes, the places he still lived when he went silent at dinner or flinched at sudden movement. Yet she never pushed. Love, she'd learned, wasn't about fixing. It was about staying. Therapy came later, reluctantly. The military counselor spoke softly, using words like trauma and adjustment. At first, Andrew hated the sterile room, the faint buzz of the fluorescent light. But over time, something shifted. He began to speak, haltingly, then steadily, about what it felt like to lose men under his command, about guilt that ate at him, about hearing children's laughter and dreams that ended in explosions. He met other veterans there, men who looked fine but carried the same invisible fractures. One day, during a group session, he realized he wasn't alone. That recognition didn't heal him, but it gave him direction. He started small, helping out at the local veteran center, fixing broken chairs, organizing supplies. But soon he began to write. Essays, reflections, memories shaped into something that could breathe outside his head. The first piece he published was called The Long Road Home. It wasn't about war. It was about silence and how love survives it. The response surprised him. Letters arrived from strangers, wives, sons, daughters of soldiers, saying his words helped him understand, even a little. It felt like purpose again, the kind he'd lost on that road. Sarah noticed a change. His shoulders began to loosen. His laughter came more easily. Emily, now 7, would sit beside him while he wrote, doodling in his notebook margins. "Write about me next," she'd say, and he would smile and promise he would. Years passed, slow and steady. Andrew turned his pain into service, traveling to speak with other veterans. He stood before rooms filled with quiet men and told them that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to live with memory as a companion, not an enemy. Sometimes, on long drives home from events, he'd glance at the photo still tucked in his vest pocket, the same one he'd carried through war. It was faded now, edges curled, but it still held the light of that day, the promise that had kept him breathing. He no longer dreamed of battlefields. Instead, he dreamed of Emily's laughter echoing across the yard, of Sarah humming softly as she painted in the kitchen. The war would always live inside him, but so would love. And love, he realized, was louder. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting their porch in amber light, Andrew sat with Sarah watching Emily chase fireflies. The child's laughter floated through the air, bright and whole. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, he felt peace that didn't come from silence but from presence. He thought of the road that had brought him here, of sand and smoke, of pain and distance, of hope reborn from ruin. He knew there were scars that would never fade, memories that would visit uninvited. But he also knew that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something beautiful on top of it. Emily caught a firefly and ran to him, her small hands cupped around the glowing insect. "Look, Daddy Light." Andrew smiled, feeling the sting of tears, not of sorrow but of gratitude. He opened her hands gently and let the tiny creature fly free. The glow lingered for a moment in the air before disappearing into the dusk. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice barely above the rustle of leaves. "Light." Sarah took his hand, and together they watched the last of the day fade into night. For once, the darkness felt gentle, not an ending, but a place where rest finally waited. He had come home. Truly, finally, home.